Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome to the 70th episode of the Pen Podcast, Psychic Eye Mystery Podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Laurie, with my wonderful sidekick, Sydney Elavsky. And I've finally gotten around to saying your last name. So,
Woohoo.
it's on the thing. I'm like, well, I can try and keep her a little bit, anonymous, but, whatever. You're just exposed now.
It's
Everyone
fine.
Everyone, all of our 10 fans know who you are now.
Oh, stop. There's at least 15.
Wishful thinking. So anyway, all right, let's get to book promo. Boop-a-doo-doo. This just
Yay.
came out 2 weeks ago, 1 week and a half ago. A Trinket for the Taking. I'm super, super excited, geeked about this series. It's already a USA Today best-selling book. And it's getting some, you know, like I'm good. I'm just gonna say it. It's getting some amazing praise.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
I wore in blue. I wore blue in honor of the book, and this is my little
I
hedgehog
love that. That's so cute.
bookmarks. My friend Chris and I put these together, and we had a book signing in Houston, and so I was on a mission to make 50 of them. And it's like 9:30 at night, and I'm crimping, and Chris is like twisting wire, and it's just like it went from la, 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 conversational to da, 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 gotta make the donuts. So anyway, so those got handed out at Murder by the Book. And I'm sure if you go ahead and order a copy from by the Book in Houston, they not only have signed copies, but I left behind a whole bunch of bookmarks. So they might send you one if you want to go there. Um, for that one. This book is the first in a new series. It takes place in the DC, Washington, DC area. It's sort of like a cozy meets fantasy kind of world. My editor wanted a new series for me, and so his instructions were write something about a witch. That's as detailed as it got.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So, it was one of those where I was so sick last year that it took a very long time for me to be able to kick it out just because I was so nauseous for, a year and a half. And then I finished it the night before surgery, sent it off, went into surgery, had my gallbladder removed, came out of surgery, was waking up where your mind wakes up before your body does, in
Hmm.
recovery. And just bulleting through my mind was, oh my God, what have I done? There's no witches. There are no witches in the book at all.
So you
I'm
take
gonna have to
direction
rewrite
well.
this fucker. So it was a nervous 2 weeks, but he sent me an email, and he was like, he couldn't turn the pages fast enough. He loved it, and he sent it straight to copy editing, no revisions necessary. So pulled that one out of my ass. Let me tell you, I pulled that one off.
Wow.
But basically, it takes place in the DC area. It's a cozy fantasy kind of mystery where the protagonist, Duffy Van Dalen, is about to celebrate, well, she is celebrating her 200th birthday. 180 years ago, 182 years ago, when she was 18, she met a tall, strapping Viking-looking gentleman, came to her birthday party in Copenhagen and won her in a gambling match against her father. And that night, he bound her in a spell, and she discovered that walking amongst us are mystics. And mystics basically are individuals, people who have at some point in their lives been bound by a spell. And when you get bound by a spell, it gives you longevity. She's 200 years old, doesn't look a day over 30. I wish. And magical access to magical powers and the ability to weave spells, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Primarily within this community, within this mystic community, um, trinkets, which are uh, magical objects. They're basically just, like your pen could be a trinket. It's been loaded with a magical essence for a specific task. So as an example, if I enchanted this pen, I could write a check to be cashed anywhere, for $1 million, right? So it's stuff like that. So mystics live a pretty magical, easygoing life because they can just kind of um, get and trade trinkets to make their lives better. And the story is about Dovey, who acts as an investigator, retrieving trinkets that fall into the hands of the unbound. So regular people, every once in a while, come across a trinket and it does magical things for them, and then they run away with it. So she's in charge of bringing that back. And in this particular story, what has gone missing is something called Pandora's Promise, which is an emerald ring held in a ring box. And when the box is open and exposed to someone, they immediately work to commit suicide in the manner within which they fear the most. So if they're afraid of
Ooh.
heights, they'll throw themselves off a bridge or a building. If they're afraid of fire, they will, um, do that.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of kind of suicide stuff going on in the book. Trigger warning, if that is a trigger for you, this probably will not be the book for you to read. Otherwise, it's a page turner. So she meets as a love interest. Elric, who bound her, is also a love interest. But after 180 years, that relationship might be getting a little stale, and she
Mhm.
bumps into an FBI agent who just happens to be a former model because that's just a prerequisite, right, for the FBI Academy. It's like, oh, you walk the catwalk? Cool, you're on board. So she meets Grant Isaac Barlow, Gibb, and sparks fly. And he's investigating a series of murders in one individual family where, over the course of just a short period of time, members of that family are committing suicide.
Hmm.
So, they join forces and hijinks ensue. So, if that appeals to you, run out right now and buy the book. Sold everywhere books are sold. Like I said, there are signed copies at Once Upon a Crime here in Minneapolis and signed copies in Houston at Murder by the Book. That's the
Cool.
book pitch. That's the book
Sound,
pitch.
sounds
Normally I don't go
awesome.
on that long, but like this just came out, so I'm trying to whoop whoop
Hmm.
bump it up. And then anecdotes. I had one not too long ago, and I've been dying to share it.
Oh,
I
cool.
was reading for a woman, and I could tell that she was brand new to me, and I could, every once in a while you can tell that someone has made an appointment and they're kind of wondering, like, was this a good idea? Kind of thing. Like they come in wearing that skeptic hat. And so her grandmother came in and identified herself, stuff was hitting, it was great. And then her grandmother showed me this bowl of berries. And and I knew it was in reference to a female, but I kept thinking, like, how does Barry, because I felt like it was a name, how does Barry fit a female? So I asked her, I'm like, are there any women named Barry in your family? And she goes, no, but I have an aunt named Cherry.
Ah.
I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know why that she just didn't show me a bowl of like cherries, but she went with the berry option. I might have miscalculated or thought someone was good baker if I just saw cherries, but she showed me a whole mixed bowl of blueberries, cherries, strawberries, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
They get really clever on the other side. They really do. The game of charades is always so fun for me. Have had, just a wonderful time of late reading for new clients and old. If you would like to make an appointment for yourself and see what the year 2025 has in store for you, this is why I love doing readings this time of year because we get that whole
Hmm.
calendar year outlook. You can visit victorialaurie.com. and click on the book your psychic appointment now. And that heads right to my calendar. You can book a session with me. And
And you really should because you just did mine a couple weeks
I
ago,
did.
and
I
I
did.
am very
So
much
good
looking
things.
forward. I'm
So
so
good
looking
things.
forward to 2025 now. I was a little
Hmm.
not gonna get that, but
It's a mixed
but
bag. I will
yes,
tell you,
but I'm
it's a
looking
really
forward
mixed
to
bag
it.
for
Yeah.
some people.
Hmm.
I think that the next 2 years are going to be great for some people. And there'll be years to just kind of keep on plugging for the general majority of us. I don't see the world ending. I'm not nervous about the future until we get to like 2027, and then there's stuff. But I'll talk about that next year in my kind of what to expect in the
Hmm.
future sort of podcast that we'll end up doing. So, yeah, there was some really good stuff for you.
I
There's some
know.
great stuff for you actually long term. So, I'm thrilled because,
Yeah.
I hate you. So, so yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing to watch you just flourish next year,
Mhm.
Cindy. I can't wait. I'm excited for you. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
All right, let's get to the Scott Peterson case. And I want to preface this by saying that um, there was more than just Laci Peterson as a victim. I really, really felt for Amber to the point that I kind of made her, I started out this story from her perspective. This woman has suffered significantly. She put herself at great risk to help the police um, prosecute and ultimately win a conviction for Scott Peterson. Um, that's where we start. We start the story off with her. Don't
Mhm.
think for a moment that I don't have sympathy for Lacey and her unborn child. I had massive, massive um, feelings about that, sadness and anger, and you know, the whole thing that everybody's feeling about that type of just wicked evil. I don't know how you murder a pregnant woman. Like, how do you do that?
Oh
You
God,
know,
yeah.
like uh, uh, I write about murder every day. So I can come up with some pretty dark stuff, but that just so beyond my ability to comprehend. So,
Mhm.
um,
Well, not
yeah,
just a pregnant woman, pregnant with your child,
yeah,
like murdering your child as well. But yeah, gosh.
right. And it was a boy.
Hmm.
Anyway, all right. Let's get to it. Let's get to it, and then I'll give my opinion about what I think happened and what I think is going to happen. So,
Okay.
take it away, my friend.
All right. In early October of 2002, Sean Sibley phoned her best friend, Amber Fry, bubbling with excitement. Sean told Amber she'd just met a great guy, 29 years old, good looking, polite, smart, and very funny, at a work conference. Sean said that over the course of the few days at the conference, she'd gotten to know this guy, whose name was Scott, and that over the course of their conversations, Scott had revealed his desire to meet the one. He was looking for a long-term committed relationship and had asked her if she knew of anyone who would be a good match for him. Sean immediately thought of Amber and asked her bestie if she could give Scott her phone number. Based on Sean's glowing endorsement, Amber agreed. Several weeks later, Scott called Amber, and there was an instant spark of chemistry between them on the phone. They made plans to meet at the Elephant Bar in Fresno, California, and from there, if the sparks continued, they'd find a good restaurant for dinner. The next evening, on November 20th, 2002, Scott and Amber met, and sparks did indeed fly. The pair went back to Scott's hotel room so that he could shower and change after a long day on the road. He was a traveling fertilizer salesman. And there he surprised Amber with champagne and strawberries. After cleaning himself up, Scott drove Amber to a Japanese restaurant where he'd already booked them a private room for dinner. Over dinner, the pair spent time getting to know one another. 27-year-old Amber was fresh off a painful divorce with an infant child at home. She'd just graduated from massage school and was looking to make a life for herself and her daughter. Scott, who at the time was 29, ran his own business, came from a large blended family, was single, never married, and was very interested in a long-term committed relationship. He lived an hour and a half north from Amber, but was constantly traveling back and forth from Bakersfield to Modesto. Fresno, where Amber lived, was the midway point between the two cities. After dinner, Scott took Amber to a karaoke bar, asking her to perform a duet with him, and after that, they returned to his hotel room where she spent the night. The next morning, Amber expressed her regret at having been intimate with Scott so soon after meeting him, but he assured her that he was happy that they had been intimate so quickly. He then told her that he would be spending the following week in Alaska with his family for Thanksgiving, but that he'd be home again soon and he wanted to see her again. In the next 6 weeks, the couple became very close, talking nightly, sharing weekday evenings together, and Amber felt herself quickly falling for the incredibly romantic, thoughtful, funny, kind-hearted guy. He often showed up with flowers, lavished her with attention, and was so sweet to and with her baby daughter, Ariana. The first week of December, however, a mutual friend had discovered that Scott, whom he knew to be married, was dating Amber. The friend threatened Scott that he was going to tell Amber if Scott didn't, so on December 9th, Scott made plans to see Amber, noting that he had something really important he needed to tell her. He arrived that evening, and it was clear that whatever Scott needed to tell her was causing him a tremendous amount of anguish. Crying in his chair at her kitchen table, he confessed to Amber that he had been married, but that he'd lost his wife and was struggling with facing the upcoming holidays alone for the first time since losing her. Amber was brokenhearted for him and quickly told him she wasn't angry at him for lying to her about previously being married. She understood how devastating it must be for him at this time of year and so soon after he'd lost his wife. Amber wanted to ask Scott the details surrounding his wife's death, but seeing him so emotional over it, she decided to wait until later in their relationship to do so. Scott returned home the next day and purchased some fishing gear to go along with the brand new boat he'd purchased the same day he'd headed south to tell Amber about the wife he'd lost. 2 days before, in fact, on December 8th, Scott had been online, researching boats for sale, fishing equipment, and, curiously, the flow of currents in and around Brooks Island, a small island off the coast of the Berkeley Marina, 90 miles northwest of his home in Modesto. Scott continued to call Amber regularly, and the weekend before Christmas, Scott and Amber attended her office Christmas party. Scott had arrived to escort Amber at her doorstep, carrying 3 dozen roses and more champagne. The pair had a wonderful evening together, after which Scott told Amber that he was headed to Maine to spend Christmas with his family, and then immediately to Europe for business and to spend New Year's in Paris. He promised to call her while he was away. Meanwhile, back in Modesto, Scott's wife of 5 years, Laci Peterson, who was 8.5 months pregnant with Scott's son, Connor, at the time, was at the annual gathering of her closest friend's Christmas party. Normally, Laci would be hosting this affair, but this year, being so overwhelmed with all the time Scott was spending on the road and being so heavily pregnant, Laci gave up the duty to one of her other girlfriends in the group. More than one of her friends noted that Laci spent much of that evening sitting on a chair on the porch looking a bit tired and sad. A photo of her was taken in that chair, and it would be the last photo taken of her alive and well. Just a few days later, on Christmas Eve 2002, Scott and Laci spent the morning together, sharing a bowl of cereal while watching Martha Stewart before he headed out to go golfing for the day. Laci, he later claimed, planned to take their dog Mackenzie for a walk and spend the rest of the day baking for Christmas. In reality, Scott did not go golfing. Instead, he traveled the short distance to the strip mall where he kept his work inventory and had secretly stored his new boat. After hooking the boat to the trailer hitch on the back of his truck, Scott drove 90 miles north to the Berkeley Marina. There, Scott spent a few hours on the water before returning home. Once he arrived at his house, he noted that their dog was in the backyard with her leash still attached. A neighbor would later claim that she spotted Mackenzie wandering the neighborhood, and the kindly neighbor had simply tucked the pooch back inside the fenced-in yard at the Petersons' home until either Laci or Scott came back. Once inside his house, Scott claimed to notice that his wife wasn't home and the dog was loose in the backyard with her leash still attached, which she found odd. Scott then peeled off his clothes and put them in the washer before heading to the shower. After that, he made himself something to eat, and only then did he decide to call Laci's mother. Immediately after answering the call, Scott said, "Laci's missing." Laci's mother, Sharon Roach, would later note the peculiar use of the phrase because Scott hadn't begun the conversation by asking if Laci was with her. He'd merely said, "Laci's missing." Per Sharon's instructions, Scott then proceeded to go to the neighbors to inquire about Laci's whereabouts. He told some neighbors that he'd been golfing all day and had come home to find her gone, while others he told he'd been fishing all day to come home and find her gone. Scott then dutifully went back home to contact Laci's friends one by one, and using the same phrase, Laci's missing, over and over with each new call. Every time, each person found it peculiar that he was beginning the conversation by suggesting immediately that Laci was missing, rather than inquiring if Laci was with them or if they knew where she was. Scott had used the out golfing all day line with his mother-in-law, who told her husband, Laci's stepfather, to call the police before racing over to her daughter's home. Scott's father-in-law contacted police, and Detective Al Burkini was assigned to the case of the missing pregnant woman. He arrived on the scene to find the neighborhood filled with people and a helicopter overhead, all searching for Laci. Scott introduced himself to Detective Burkini, then immediately pulled out from his pocket. Now remember, he'd washed his clothes. A receipt with a timestamp from the Berkeley Marina showing he'd been there that day and at what time. Detective Brocchini asked to see the inside of the Petersons' residence. Scott was fully cooperative and led the way inside. Brocchini noted that the house appeared to be neat and well loved. The nursery was fully set up, awaiting baby Connor's birth. Brocchini then asked to see Scott's boat, and the pair drove to the small warehouse where Scott stored the boat, and the detective took photos and inspected the area. He noted that in the bottom of the small motorboat was a homemade anchor, created by having poured concrete into a bucket with a U-curved piece of rebar that was then pushed into the cement to create a handle. Curiously, the detective noted that the anchor didn't have any rope attached to it, and there was no rope in the boat to secure the anchor or tie off the boat itself. Burkini then asked Scott to come to the station for an interview, and Scott readily agreed. During the interview, Scott appeared polite and forthcoming. He answers questions readily, with his hands resting on his thighs and a relaxed posture as if he didn't have a care in the world. Burkini asked him why he'd told some neighbors and family that he'd been golfing, when in fact he'd taken his brand new boat 90 miles north to the Berkeley Marina, in Scott's words, to get the boat in the water. Scott's explanation was that he'd only made up his mind to go fishing instead of golfing at the last minute, and he'd chosen fishing because it was too cold out to play golf. Detective Burkini then asked Scott if he would be willing to take a polygraph, and Scott agreed, so they set up a time for the following day. A search warrant was immediately issued for the warehouse, Scott's boat, and the Petersons' residence, but the only two pieces of exculpatory evidence the CSI techs discovered was a long black hair curled around a pair of needle-nose pliers that were found in the bottom of the boat, and evidence on the warehouse floor that Scott had made up to 5 homemade anchors, but only one was found in the bottom of the boat. The other 4 were still missing. Further, Scott had told Burkini in his initial interview that he had been fishing with the new silver lure he'd purchased. But when the crime scene techs conducted the search, the only new silver lure they found was still in its package. Meanwhile, the search for Laci continued, but no trace of her or witness to her disappearance could be found. The following day, when Burkini spoke again to Scott about the polygraph, Scott indicated that his father had advised him not to take one. On December 26th, neighbors of the Petersons came home to discover that their back door had been kicked in and they had been robbed. Police quickly homed in on 2 men for the crime, Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce. The men were arrested, and upon learning that they'd robbed the home of one of Laci Peterson's neighbors on or about the time Laci had disappeared, the men immediately confessed to the robbery but swore that they had nothing to do with her disappearance. They both readily agreed to a polygraph relating to her disappearance, and both men passed with flying colors. Further, all of the stolen property recovered from the robbery was exclusive to the home that they admitted to robbing, and neither man had a record for a violent offense. Still, they were both thoroughly investigated by police for Laci's disappearance and ultimately cleared. Over the course of the next several weeks, the search for Laci continued, with thousands of tips pouring in, but none of them leading anywhere that might indicate what happened to Laci. A volunteer command center was set up in Modesto. Volunteers posted thousands of flyers. The national news took note, and the search grid for Laci's whereabouts continued to expand. Curiously, Scott Peterson's mother, Jackie Peterson, contacted psychic Noreen Rainier, who told her that Laci had been hit over the head and had fallen and was deceased. She said she saw that her body had been wrapped in some sort of rug or canvas, which was missing from the house, and that her body would be discovered near a large body of water near a park and within sight of a large bridge. Noreen spoke to Scott only once during the session, and she claimed that he said very little and had no further questions for her. Meanwhile, back in Fresno, just a few days into the search for Laci, a friend of Amber's came across a news article about a missing pregnant woman named Laci Peterson. And although the article didn't show a photo of her husband, the article did reference a Scott Peterson, a fertilizer salesman. Amber's friend became concerned that the Scott Peterson from the article might be Amber's new boyfriend. She brought Amber the newspaper clipping, and Amber immediately contacted the Modesto police. Detective Brocchini and his partner immediately drove to Fresno to interview Amber. She related to them the details of her relationship with Scott Peterson, and Brocchini and his partner asked her if she'd be willing to wear a wire or have her phone calls recorded. She agreed to the phone recordings, so the detectives bought the equipment and set it up on her phone. On New Year's Day, Scott phoned Amber, ostensibly from Paris, where he'd watched the fireworks go off at the Eiffel Tower and was still getting used to the time change. Audibly yawning on the call and sounding tired, he told Amber that he was in a bar with his two French buddies while talking to her. In reality, where Scott Peterson actually was at a very public candlelit vigil for his missing wife. Unbeknownst to Peterson, the entire conversation was being recorded by police, and Amber played the part of smitten, oblivious to the news girlfriend like a pro. In the following weeks, Scott continued to call Amber, but he never confessed to having anything to do with Laci's disappearance. On one of their last phone calls, Scott admitted that he'd lied to Amber and told her that his wife was still alive and that she'd simply gone missing. He claimed to have kept this information from her because he was trying to protect her and her daughter from the media who were hounding him. By the end of February, the National Enquirer had gotten hold of the story that Scott had been cheating on Laci with Amber, and they were going to publish the story. The police contacted Amber, told her to brace for the media scrutiny, and said that they wouldn't expect her to continue the ruse with Peterson on the phone. Shortly thereafter, Amber told Scott she didn't think it was healthy for her to speak to him anymore, and he ended the call by telling her he hoped that when his wife was found alive, that he could end things with her and come looking again for Amber. On February 18th, 2003, Detective Brocchini obtained a second search warrant for the Petersons' home in an effort to see what had changed about the interior of the home in the ensuing 8 weeks since Laci disappeared. What they discovered was that the home was in disarray, and Scott had boxed up most of Laci's personal effects and took little care of the rest. He was also using Connor's nursery as a storage space. It was clear that he did not expect his wife and son to come back home. 2 weeks earlier, on February 3rd, Scott had sold Laci's car, and in the next week, he'd made phone calls to a realtor to inquire about putting his home up for sale. While police continued to tap Scott's phone and follow his every move, the search for Laci continued. Finally, 3.5 months since Laci disappeared, on April 13th, 2003, a couple walking on the beach of San Francisco Bay discovered the intact corpse of Connor Peterson, which had washed up on shore. On the very next day, April 14th, 2003, Laci's badly decomposed torso washed up on shore about a mile away. The autopsy could not determine if Connor had been born alive. However, it's likely he hadn't been because his body showed little evidence of decomp and Laci's cervix was still intact. Laci's head and limbs were never recovered, and the cause of death was not possible to determine, but her death was still ruled a homicide. Laci's body had protected Connor's body until the decomp had allowed Connor's body to float to the surface, and Laci's torso followed suit. On April 18th, 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested for the murder of his wife and son. Police arrested him in San Diego, where he'd been visiting his brother. On his person, he carried $15,000 in cash, various credit cards in both his name and the names of some of his relatives, and the driver's license of his brother. Scott had dyed his hair blonde, and he'd grown a goatee and a mustache, and he now very much resembled his brother's driver's license photo. Scott was also carrying camping equipment as if he were about to set off into the wilderness for a time. Most notably, however, Scott also carried a baggie filled with Viagra. Again, this was just 8 short weeks after the disappearance of his wife and unborn child. At his arraignment, Scott pled not guilty and immediately hired powerhouse defense attorney Mark Garagos. Due to the extensive publicity of the case, the venue was moved to the neighboring county of San Mateo. Jury selection began March 4th and concluded March 27th, 2004. The trial began on June 1st and didn't end until November, with jury deliberations beginning on November 3rd. Just 9 days later, on November 12th, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of the premeditated murder of his wife and son. On March 16th, 2005, the jury sentenced Scott Peterson to death, but that sentence was later overturned on appeal, and Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the ensuing 20 years, Scott's sister-in-law by marriage to his half-brother, Janie Peterson, went to school and got her law degree, and she contacted the newly formed LA Innocence Project, which claims to focus on the wrongly accused. The LA Innocence Project, on behalf of Scott Peterson, claims that Scott is innocent and that Laci was abducted and murdered, likely because the murderers were after her baby, which they wanted to sell. When Laci died, the unnamed assailants disposed of Laci and Connor's bodies in the San Francisco Bay, knowing through the media that that's an area where Scott had taken his boat to go fishing on the day Laci disappeared. The Innocence Project asked the court for what they claim is exculpatory evidence that was withheld from Peterson's defense because it pertained to the robbery of Peterson's neighbor around the time that Laci disappeared. They also asked for evidence collected on a white van that was discovered burning in an alley behind where one of the burglars' aunts lived. They also wanted the tape discovered wrapped around baby Connor when his body washed up on shore, and tape discovered in one of Laci's pockets to undergo DNA testing. Recently, the court granted a motion to have the DNA on a piece of tape wrapped around Connor's body analyzed for clues. The LA Innocence Project hopes to create reasonable doubt, and Scott Peterson has suggested that he is eager to testify if a motion for a new trial is granted. If reasonable doubt can be established, the court could grant Scott a new trial, but so far where that could lead is unknown, unless Victoria knows how the next steps in this appeal will turn out. Sources for the story include the Netflix documentary American Murder, Laci Peterson, ScreenRant.com, American Murder, the complete timeline of Laci Scott Peterson's trial, Wikipedia, and NBC News. What to Know, the Scott Peterson murder case timeline. In the Washington Post article, Scott Peterson returns to court 20 years after his wife's murder. So, tell us, Victoria, what's gone on?
Well, what I find interesting is to create reasonable doubt, they have to bring forward these two robbers that robbed a neighbor's house around the time um, of Laci's disappearance. The robbers claimed, now keep in mind, these guys are basically meth heads, right? They're
Hmm.
addicted to opioids or drugs. That's why they were robbing. They wanted money for drugs, okay? Um, and when you're desperate and you are desperate enough to start robbing houses, what you don't want are complications. Kidnapping a pregnant woman to hopefully sell her baby to, I don't know, a random stranger sounds pretty fucking complicated to me, right?
Hmm.
So it's laughable to me that the defense is going to try and take these two men and bill them as these conniving, evil, you know, even though they have there's no past crime that can be attributed to them that was even violent. Okay.
Yeah.
But they are admitted meth heads. They are, I don't know, drug addicts. They
Hmm.
admitted to robbing the house. They passed lie detector tests. All of the evidence for them points to their robbery, the robbery. None of the evidence points to them as kidnappers and abducted child sellers, right? Human
Yeah.
traffickers. So, this invention that it must have been them, let's create reasonable doubt around them. It's just, to me, it's so laughable because all of the evidence points to him premeditating this crime. The specifics around the anchors, that's to me, that's just smoking gun shit to
Hmm.
me, right? There's only one of five found in the bottom of the boat. There's no rope. So obviously he miscalculated on the amount of rope that he would need to dispose of Lacey's body and held on to one anchor. her torso was found. My theory is that he tied her hands to one anchor, tied uh, perhaps each leg or both legs to an anchor, tied one around her neck and one around her torso.
Hmm.
The torso was going to get bloated and fill with air. The limbs, not so much. So the reason the torso, only the torso and not the limbs or the head were found, I don't think he dismembered her. I think he needed things to tie the anchors to. And those limbs seemed, plus the torso, seemed to him like, okay, she's going to decompose at the bottom of the ocean, so to speak.
Hmm.
And she didn't, you know. I think that there is no doubt, like zero doubt in my mind that he murdered her, and that this was premeditated, and he ruined not only the lives of her son, her family, but also Amber. Amber has really, really struggled since this whole thing. I mean, how do you trust anybody, right? She
Oh
has
yeah.
been married and divorced again. She's a single mom. She has struggled to make a living, to earn a wage. Um, and he fucking murdered her too in some ways. Do you know?
Hmm.
So my theory is that um, he was discovered at having lied about being married, and this was sort of a panicked, let's throw this all together. The whole I went golfing, apparently alone, right? Hours, right? Uh, and then he went fishing, and then he went back and forth on the fishing story. Like he went fishing because it was too cold to go golfing. Well, if it's too cold to go golfing, trust me, it's too fucking cold to go fishing. It's much
Yeah.
colder on the water than it is on the golf course, you moron.
Hmm.
Okay. And the whole, he peels off his clothes and he washes those and takes a shower before he does anything else. He finds the dog in the backyard, leash still attached, suspect, right? His very, very pregnant wife is nowhere to be found. And he just goes about, doo doo doo, making himself something to eat and like not a care in the world, right?
Hmm.
And then the police show up and magically from his pocket, he produces a receipt for the marina. Shocking, right? Like I wasn't anywhere around in the neighborhood. I was, 90 miles away or whatever it was. Um, so he peels off his coat, he takes out the receipt, and then he gets dressed, goes back to the laundry room, or he's just carrying this receipt around,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then shoves it back in his pocket. Well, you know, that's not suspect. And then the whole he told his mother-in-law that he went golfing. She relayed that to his father-in-law. You can hear the 911 call to that he makes, the stepfather makes about his very pregnant daughter. Was his daughter-in-law, stepdaughter, his very
Stepdaughter. Yeah.
pregnant stepdaughter being missing. And he says very clearly that his his son-in-law went golfing.
Hmm.
So this back like people attribute some intellect to this guy, and he's so fucking stupid, you
Yeah.
know? Like it's just so fucking stupid to not have your story straight. If you're going to carry out this elaborate plan, you're going to buy a fishing boat, you're going to make anchors, you're going to, fabricate this whole alibi, and you can't even get that part right.
Hmm.
Like how goddamn dumb are you? You know? You're stupid. So, and thank God. I mean, thank God he was that dumb because it just pokes more holes in his story. So this whole Innocence Project, it's a really good documentary on Netflix. I highly recommend people kind of take a look at it because his sister-in-law, who's married to his brother, goes to law school for the sole purpose of trying to dig up whatever she can to form reasonable doubt to get Scott off. And
Hmm.
I don't understand that when the evidence is so clear that he murdered his pregnant wife. Like, what is wrong with you, woman? What the
Yeah.
fuck is wrong with you? Like, look at it. Look at it. He murdered her, and you want him to go free? Come on. Like, come on. What the hell is going on in your brain that you can't divorce yourself from this evil human being? Yeah, he's a member of the family, but he's an evil fucking sociopath. So
Yeah.
trying to paint him as this, in this light of, oh, he's, wrongly accused and the press was out to get him. And oh my God, all you have to do is just spend 5 minutes watching the interviews that he gave to reporters that he invited into his home. And he's sweating, and his story is like all over the place. And he's trying to control this narrative. And him on the phone with Amber being recorded. Yeah, I'm in Paris. Oh, yeah, I'm with Jacques and Francois. Like he can't even come up with, authentic sort of French names. Like I'm with Jacques and Francois, we are in the Paris bar. And oh my God, like, it's just so
Yeah.
contrived. It's so ridiculous. So do I think he's ever going to see the light of day? No. No.
Good.
He will spend the rest of his life deservedly in prison. He murdered his wife. Um, I think that the psychic intuitive that picked up on all of those details that turned out to be true, what talent. She's amazing. That's
Mm,
fantastic. The only thing that differs with my intuition on what she had stated was she believes Lacey was hit over the head. I don't think so. I think he strangled her because I think Scott thought through how to murder her and how to establish a quasi alibi, but I don't think in that thinking, in that, okay, how am I going to do it? Big guy, she was a tiny woman. Um, they're watching Martha Stewart. That is kind of key. So they're on the couch, cuddled, watching Martha Stewart. I believe like he got up maybe to pretend to go get a drink of water or something, came back and then strangled her. I think he strangled her because every time I try and tune into her energy, I feel constricted around the neck. Could it be because he tied a rope and an anchor, around her neck to make her sink? It could be, but
mhm.
I get a sense of almost choking. So and I don't get the blunt head trauma. I could absolutely be wrong. This
Yeah.
other psychic could be, just knocking it out of the park. She really could have. She was talking to a direct relation when she was intuiting this information. I've never met any of the Peterson family. And the fact that she was talking to Scott Peterson too. I mean, that's just so creepy. This poor woman,
Yeah.
she just must be like, holy fuck, I talked to that guy. Um, and has probably kicked herself for not sensing the lies and the evil coming off of him. But that's the only area where I feel a little bit off about what she came up with, what she intuited, what she got. I
Hmm.
just don't think he was willing to risk blood splatter.
Yeah. Oh
He
yeah,
knew.
because that'd be evidence right there. You're right.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And hitting her over the head is going to create a murder weapon and
Hmm.
is going to create possible trace evidence. And I just don't think he was willing to risk that.
Yeah.
So
That makes sense.
that's why I think he strangled her. Again, big guy. He works with fertilizer, so his arms and his grip are very strong because he's got to haul those big bags into his truck.
Hmm.
And that would not have been necessarily difficult for him. So the rest of what she said, that intuitive said happened, I am well behind. So
Hmm.
yeah, I hope he rots. I hope he gets shanked. I'll be perfectly honest. A guy who's willing to do that to his very pregnant wife deserved it. He deserved the death penalty. I don't have any sympathy for him whatsoever. I'm not one of those kumbaya people who's like, oh, you know, killing a murdering evil piece of shit is so wrong. I write murder for a living. I can see the justice in it,
Yeah.
like, okay, dude, you did that. You murdered your unborn child and your very innocent wife. You looked her in the eye as you were killing her.
Hmm.
You betrayed her on levels that are just beyond. So, and this whole thing to charm Amber. Um, Women, do some Google searches.
Mm.
If you meet someone and he's oh so charming, and you're kind of like, wow, he's Prince Charming, he's showing up and saying all the right things, lavishing you with attention, bringing you gifts, and he's a traveling salesman, oh, I'd Google the shit out of that. I wouldn't
Well,
buy it.
yeah, luckily we have that right at our fingertips and right in our hands and our phones. We can look
Right.
up that stuff now. It was
Back then, it was a little more difficult.
unfortunately it was,
Yeah. Yeah.
less
And
available.
I think Amber came out, number one, she was pretty young. Number two, she has an infant son, or daughter, excuse me. She has an
Daughter.
infant daughter. She came through a very difficult divorce. It was really rough on her, and she's
Mhm.
just trying to survive. So my thinking is that she didn't have the energy and she didn't have the will to go looking for something that was going to make her doubt him, because the hope of what it could turn into was just too overwhelming at that time. You know, she
Yeah.
deserved someone wonderful in her life. She really did.
Hmm.
And so you don't want to, you just don't want to burst the bubble. I get it. I get it. I get it. So just tragedy all the way around, all the way around. Really sad case. But
Yeah. What do you think made the Innocence Project even think he was innocent? Like,
it's a different Innocence Project. So the Innocence Project that we all think of and are is very famous for really doing good work out there, getting innocent, accused and convicted people out of jail. They do amazing work. This is a new group that it was newly formed. They need funding. They're gonna get it from the Peterson family. Let me tell you, they've got money,
uh,
you know.
yeah.
So this is a different group than
And they
what
get their
we all
name in the
know,
press because it's a big
for sure,
high profile thing.
for sure.
Okay, good. It's not
Yeah,
the one I know. It's not the one
It's
I
not
know
the
and love.
Innocence Project that we think it is. It's not.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally different.
Right.
Because I don't think that the Innocence Project would touch this with a 10-foot pole. Number one, he's not on death row, right? And
Hmm.
number two, the evidence is just so clear. So they have people who are on death row and you know serving life sentences in much more dire situations to pay attention to. They don't need to focus on Scott Peterson, you
Yeah.
know, his lying, cheating, murdering ass. So.
Yeah. And after this, we don't need to either. We can just forget he ever existed
Yeah,
because he's
exactly.
gross.
Exactly. I don't see a new trial. I don't see
Good.
anything. I just felt like I watched there was footage that I watched where he was, it's probably that documentary where he was shown in court, just on the other end of a Zoom screen, and he looks different and similar. And uh again, it's that sociopath, malignant narcissist. He's going to spin this story. He just needs a chance to spin the story. He can get people to believe him if only he's allowed to testify on his behalf. You know,
Hmm.
he really thinks that he can charm people into ignoring the evidence. And it didn't
Yeah.
work the first time, and it ain't going to work the second time. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Screw him.
Yeah. No one but like his immediate family, I think, believes him because he's a
Yeah.
liar.
Hmm.
Liar, liar. So anyway, yeah, thanks for reading that through, Cindy. You did a beautiful job,
Thank
as
you.
always. Yeah. And
It's
we'll be back.
always a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. We'll be back next week with more. We're gonna do so I'll let you talk about what we're gonna do next week.
Okay, yeah, we have a new thing that we're going to do. I'm pretty sure we're calling it a book and a reading.
Hmm.
I thought of something
Or
funnier,
reading in a book.
or reading in a book. I thought of something funnier, but of course,
We'll figure it
right
out
now
next
I
week.
can't remember. It was punny what I thought of. Anyway, so what we're gonna do for next week is we have an interview lined up with a book blogger. I don't even know if you call them bloggers
Influencer.
anymore.
She's a
Influencer. Yeah,
yeah,
that just showed my
Instagram
age just
influencer.
now. Oh
Yeah.
my God, I showed my age. A book blogger. No, an Instagram influencer. Her name is Jamie Alexander, and we're going to interview her and we're going to talk about books and like her favorite books and authors in general and people, maybe some new people on the scene that we're liking or whatever. And then that'll be for about the first half, just chatting with her. And then for the second half, she's going to get a reading. That's where the reading comes in. So we
From
haven't,
moi. So I can take a
but
look at it at what's going on for her 2025. So you guys get a little bit
mhm,
of a sample of kind of, how I work and maybe even some themes that I'm seeing sort of ubiquitously amongst all of my clients for 2025. We'll see if those things are
mhm.
affecting her. But it should be a fun little escape. So
Yep. And we're still doing murder stuff. Like we won't stop doing these cold case murdery things, but this is just in addition to.
mhm. And the
So
books that we'll be talking about will be mysteries. So
yes.
it still fits the Psychic Eye Mystery podcast.
Hmm. Yeah.
We got to make sure that, we can't deviate too far. We can do some fun things like this, but we can't deviate too far. So anyway, all right. Again, everybody, if you want to know more about me, the books, booking a reading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, visit victorialaurie.com. If you are an independent author or looking to be an independent author and you have a manuscript that you would like to have copy edited by one of the best in the business, we're going to post Cindy's contact information below. So you'll be able to look at that. And if you wanted to, you can even send her, if you have an idea for a murder that you would like us to kind of look at and investigate, you'll have her contact information. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Cindy, it was great seeing you as always. Thank you, thank you, thank you for
Yes.
doing this with me.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, my pleasure, always. And we will see you next week. Okay.
All right.
All right. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.